of the Court of Appeal haven't been elevated. The Supreme Court judgment delivered by Justice Ejembi Eku ordered that the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court to hand over the case to another judge for a fresh trial. Mr. Kalu, however, went back to the Federal High Court and obtained an order prohibiting the EFCC from initiating fresh prosecution of him. Justice Ian Eko, who issued the prohibition order against the EFCC, said that Orji Kalu was not expressly stated in the judgments of the Supreme Court. The federal government appeal against the decision of the High Court was dismissed for failure to produce proper records of proceedings of the High Court. Celestina Iria, TVC News, Abuja.
Let's now take a short break, and when we return, it will be time to speak with our guest of the day, a security consultant and CEO, Beacon Consulting Limited, Dr. Kabiru Adamu, on the Nigerian Army's reaffirming faith in civil rule. Please stay with us.
Stay ahead with the biggest news stories. Go beyond the news headlines. Experience impactful investigations. Enjoy resourceful news coverage in real time. TVC News at 7 and TVC News at 10 p.m. Live every day on this channel. TVC News. First with breaking news.
There is always more to a story than the screaming headline. The part of a story that is not told casts a shadow. It's like the part of an object that is not reached by light. On TVC News, I'm able to explore the many angles there are to a story, talking to stakeholders, asking the difficult questions, and digging for facts. I believe the viewers are able to make a better decision if they're well informed and understand not just a part, but the complete story. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. In the face of consistent clamor by some Nigerians for a military takeover, the Nigerian military has reaffirmed its commitments to democratic rule. Tonight, let's speak with a security consultant and CEO, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, Dr. Kabiru Adamu. Dr. Adamu, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's so good to see you again.
Same here. Good evening.
Right. So this clamor for military rule from some quarters, what do you think is responsible for this agitation?
I think it's quite unfortunate. Anyone who understands the history of Nigeria and, in fact, who has lived under the military era, it's quite unfortunate, really, that the reference will be made to return to that era. Having said that, across the Sahel, and of course the West African sub-region, of recent, we've seen several coup d'etats that have occurred. The most recent one has been in Niger Republic. Now, after that coup, a couple of things became obvious. Number one is the question of whether democracy has provided the necessary needs of the citizens of those countries. And so a lot of conversation is ongoing at the moment on whether how most African countries have embraced or are practicing democracy is meeting the needs. And I think that debate is also ongoing here in Nigeria at the moment. The second thing that has arisen is the role of the military in either supporting democracy or, in some instances, steering democracy back to what it's meant to be. Now, in both instances, the argument has been, well, if the type of democracy that has been embraced in those countries is not solving the basic needs of the citizens, starting from the economy to security to their social needs, then perhaps there is a need to consider other options of government. And I think it is that kind of debate that we're seeing in Nigeria at the moment. But the good thing is that there is, in terms of the reactions that we've seen from, starting from the military itself, the Chief of Defense Staff himself has come out to state clearly and unequivocally that the military is subservient to the civilian government, and that it would continue to play that role. And then more recently, the Chief of Army Staff has also stated that. I have also heard, even though it hasn't received the kind of public attention that of the CDS and the Chief of Army Staff got, I've heard the Chief of Naval Staff, and then of course the Chief of Air Staff also repeat that. So it appears at least the hierarchy of the military prepared to continue supporting this component. But suffice to say that these two discussions regarding the failure of democracy to meet the needs of several parts of West Africa, including in Nigeria, is a narrative that is quite very strong at the moment.
Right, but Doctor, as a security expert, do you agree that the worst civilian rule is better than the best military regime?
There are a couple of, I would say, perspectives in this matter. Those who consider freedom, of human rights, freedom of association, and several other components of the international humanitarian law and other aspects of our existence, who consider that as the very basis of human existence, would say that the worst form of civil rule is better than the best form of autocratic or military rule. However, there are others who would say, okay, how about security? Where there is a complete failure and breakdown of security, like we're seeing in several African countries, and then where we're seeing politicians actually, behaving in a manner that shows clearly that the national interest of their countries is not what they are after, then perhaps the only option available would be the military option. So that debate is out there. But personally speaking, I would say that the desire to correct itself, every democratic experience, every democratic journey has that ability to correct itself. And I think I would rather have that where we allow perhaps the mistakes that our democratic experiences would learn from. I mean, if you look at back in Nigeria, especially in this Fourth Republic, several occurrences, the most recent, and I think that is very obvious to us, I will just mention two. During the time of Yaradua when he was ill, and then the role played by the National Assembly then. And then, of course, more recently, when former President Obasanjo attempted his third term, and we saw the role played by the National Assembly. All of these are corrective measures. If you go to Senegal at the moment, that is at the height of the conversation in West Africa, when the current president attempted to extend his tenure, it was the courts that came in to at least prevent the kind of chaos that we would have seen in Senegal, even though it's still not over, but at least we've seen clearly that the courts are playing that role. So I'd rather have that, where the three institutions, and I think this is what we need to really focus on in Nigeria, the role that is being played by the three institutions, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. If we continue to insist on the independence and the autonomy of all of these three arms of the democratic system, their ability to check each other, then I think the mistakes will be done as we're seeing, but then they will be corrected. I would rather have that than the military, for instance, truncate that democracy and then take us back 100 or even more years than that.
Right. I mean, part of the reason we're having this conversation tonight is because this is not the first time the Nigerian army is talking tough on containing all forms of threats to the nation's sovereignty. For you, how important is it for the military to keep on doing so?
So, I mean, and I'll speak really frankly, it is more than, it transcends the military. We have challenges that as a country, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and admit we have those challenges and correct them. As you know, I run a consultancy, a company, and what we do is we document fatalities. And we know that last year, over 9,000 Nigerians were killed. We also know that just a few days ago, the Global Terrorism Index released its report, and it shows that we have plateaued in terms of the number of terrorism fatalities that have been recorded. We're still, and I think our position has not changed from previous year to that. So this is not the time to clap. It is the time to look at ourselves and tell ourselves the truth. The errors and the mistakes that we've been making need to be corrected. Earlier on, I spoke about the narrative which is discussing the failure of democracy to meet the aspirations of average Nigerians. We're at a situation right now where so many indices that depict the possibility of us being a fragile state are there. Is it the indices of out-of-school children? Is it the indices of the poverty level in the country or the unemployment level? All of these indices, including social cohesion, speaks to us as being a fragile state. Now, at what point are we going to admit and then start taking corrective measures? I think this is the time. It's not the role of the military. For as long as we allow these structural deficiencies to exist, then this type of discussions will emerge. Because frankly, if we're going to do a survey today, you will find out that a lot of Nigerians are unhappy. People who can't feed themselves, people whose families sleep with hunger, they are not happy, and there are a lot of them out there. And these are structural issues that can be corrected. If we admit as a country that we have these structural issues that transcends the military, actually, it goes deeper than that. It speaks about governance. And I think the moment we do that, then we would reduce these types of conversations coming on. If we don't do it, then unfortunately, these conversations will continue to rear their ugly head.
All right, let me also have your perspective on this. Recently, some military personnel came online to express their poor welfare packages. Can there be a reform to fix this once and for all?
Yes, definitely. And I'm quite delighted that if you look through the renewed hope agenda of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, it is one of the cardinal components of his administration. It's stated there in the renewed hope agenda. It was also repeated in the PAC documents, the Policy Advisory Council documents that were produced post the inauguration. And then, of course, as part of the 9 imperatives for the government, it is also included there that the welfare of especially frontline officers of all, both the military and the paramilitary organizations, would be reviewed and, of course, increased. Now, so it's there. It's a policy statement. What now is remaining is to ensure the implementation of that. And I will always say that the president has provided a very good platform. We know his agenda, his manifesto as contained in the renewed hope. He has appointed ministers. He has also signed performance bonds with these ministers. And I'm very delighted that the performance delivery process, which is headed by the presidential advisor on policy and coordination, Hadiza Bala, is ongoing at the moment. So hopefully by April, the first review will be conducted to see where these ministers have gone in the implementation of this component. And one of the first things we're hoping to see is this point around the welfare of these officers. If officers are complaining about their welfare and we're seeing the type of, I would say, largesse that is being spent, then they should be listened to. And I think it's absolutely fair that such aspects be looked at. You cannot have a situation where your military is spread thin. Just recently, over the weekend, last weekend, we saw how in a part of the Northwest, gunmen were able to capture a military armored vehicle, and they were able to show through videos how they were destroying that vehicle. As a Nigerian, I was totally unhappy about that. I haven't seen any statement, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, by any government official condemning that action and trying to shore up support for the military. Now, we cannot continue to have that. The military are sacrificing over and over again. We as Nigerians need to come together and continue to support them. And one of the easiest ways we can do that is to address issues around their welfare. And I'm very delighted that the president has stated that he will do that. What remains to be done is to make sure that it is done. And like I've mentioned, there is a process that is ongoing. So wait till April and see how far that has gone.
Right, but with some West African countries taken over by the military, do you see this trend spreading on the continent?
I hope not. And the statement by Ecowas is quite emphatic. We saw how they responded to the Nigerian coup d'etat. Unfortunately, there were mistakes that were done in that regard. But in terms of the resolve, I think no one is in doubt about the resolve of Ecowas to support democratic transition. We also saw what they did when Senegal attempted to do what it did. So I'm not in doubt that there is totality in terms of the unison of efforts in ECOWAS to continue to support the, the democratic institutions within and the growth of democracy. But like I said earlier on at the beginning, the question is being asked for what intent, for what purpose is the democracy if it's not meeting the needs of the people. If at the moment there is no indices, that you pick up that you don't find out that the highest in the world is found in West Africa, or at least a part of the Sahel, and thirdly, including in Nigeria. So we should stop kidding ourselves. We should look at ourselves in the mirror and reverse that. And the best way to do that is to spread good governance at the federal level, at the state level, and then of course at the local government level. A lot of discussion is ongoing at the moment, apart from what I mentioned earlier on regarding the renewed hope agenda by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I know even the parliament, the 10th Assembly, is considering a review of the constitution, and I'm hoping that they too should look at components of good governance. In one of the debates they held today, I heard the former Senate President speaking about the need for them to enhance their oversight function. And I'm hoping that they will do that within the security sector. Now, all of these elements of good governance is what would help reduce the possibility of the occurrence of more coup within West Africa. For as long as we do not improve on governance, on good governance, then sadly the specter of coup would remain around with us.
All right, we'll come back to that conversation if time permits us. But let's put this conversation into proper perspective. Nigeria has enjoyed 24 years of uninterrupted democracy. So far, how will you assess the country's democratic journey?
I would say checkered. In some instances, there has been good progress. In some instances, unfortunately, there hasn't been. So as an example, we do have a very strong and quite commendable civil society. The media has grown from what it used to be to where it is today. I'm very delighted around the technology that component that the media has been able to embrace. There was a time when we were very concerned regarding the advent of social media and how it could challenge traditional media, but I think a lot of media houses have really gone far in terms of the synergy that we're seeing between traditional platforms and then the social media platforms. We're seeing a lot of advent in terms of investigative journalism coming up. But sadly, there are several other areas that I'm hoping that we see progress. One key area that we're not discussing enough is the National Assembly. That arm of government, I think, would need to increase its capacity, especially for oversight function. Its role cannot be overemphasized. When people bandy non-kinetic and kinetic approaches to managing security, I do not think we need to even discuss this as much if the National Assembly is playing its oversight function. A critical component of the provisions in our budget is actually about the non-kinetic component of approaching security. So all they need to do is to go ahead and make sure that those things are being implemented. And what are those things? Education. We can't have a country where we have the highest out-of-school children in the world, and then yet we have viral and strong institutions of government like the type we have. And then, of course, the issue of corruption that continues to bedevil us as a country, despite the proliferation of institutions that we have for managing corruption. The EFCC is there, the ICPC is there, the NFIU, name them, they're all aspects that can contribute to that. And then several others that are not as well known as these three that I've mentioned, but yet corruption remains a huge issue within the country. So these are all gaps and pitfalls that remain to be addressed, despite the huge strides that we've made. Like you rightly indicated, 24 years, this is the longest spell that we've had in our democratic journey. And I'm hoping that that spell will continue and it would continue to make progress in terms of the growth that we would experience, both in terms of mistakes that will be corrected, and then more importantly, good governance, so that Nigerians will be proud and happy to say, yes, this is what the dividends of democracy, this is what they're getting. At the moment, a lot of Nigerians do not feel that dividend is coming to them.
Right, so talking about good governance, one of the most popular definition of democracy is government to the people, for the people, and by the people. But in talking about deepening good governance, what more do you think can be done?
In simple terms, let's replicate, even if it's by 50%, what we've been able to achieve at the federal level in terms of the checks and balances that we're seeing between the executive arm and the other two arms. We haven't achieved that in a lot of the, out of the 36 states of the Federation. Very few states, very few. I think outside of Lagos, I really cannot even recall on the top of my head any other state that has been able to achieve a near separation of powers between these two, or three arms of government. Most of the other states, the legislature is in the pockets of the executive arm. And then, of course, the judiciary is also largely influenced by the executive arm. The second component is the rule of law, which cuts across all the three levels of government, both at the federal level, at the state level, and then, of course, at the local government. We need to see an improvement in terms of the rule of law. Offenses are being committed by everybody, actually. As a security practitioner, I know that one of the reasons why we have this level of insecurity in the country is the inability of several components of our law enforcement, and especially our criminal justice system, to play their role in terms of arresting and punishing offenders. And at the political level, it's even worse, because most offenses are being committed. The ability of politicians to influence the outcome of the judicial process, to influence elections, these are all challenges. And then, of course, the last is the fact that we do not have a virile and active local government system. For as long as we continue to maintain this, then sadly, we'll continue to have this challenge. And I think if we're able to look at this from these three angles that I've mentioned, especially this last component, have a local government system that is active and that we are approaching from the same lens that we're approaching the federal level, where there are checks and balances, where the issue of accountability, both financial accountability and operational accountability, are enhanced, then I think we would reduce this sorry state that we're in at the moment.
Right. I mean, from some quarters, some stakeholders opined that some Nigerians who are clamoring for military rule in Nigeria, mostly those who are dissatisfied with the outcome of the last general election. Are you surprised that some Nigerians are even thinking of this, the cause of the outcome of an election?
I'm not. So my expertise is on risk management. And one of the things that we've been advocating is for Nigeria as a country to take risk management more seriously. No matter how well you want to think about anyone, you have to have controls in place. All countries that have advanced actually do that. So on the one hand, you trust your citizens, but you also have to have a level of control. Why am I saying this? At the end of the elections, as an organization, one of the things we did is to conduct a risk survey and ask ourselves what would be the likely outcomes. You remember the infamous all eyes on the judiciary. All Absolutely. Of us saw it because it was an issue of national discourse. Now, how many of us asked ourselves what would be the consequences of the reactions that followed that? In fact, what led to that all eyes on the judiciary? So all these components, including the outcome of the petitions, how has certain arms of government, and principally I'm talking about the intelligence arm, how have they analyzed the consequences of the outcome of the elections? What kind of risk scenarios have they been able to develop, especially in this era of AI, where even a young child can impute this kind of information into an AI system, and then models will be produced for him. Now, what of some politicians who have the kind of money at their disposal, who are able to do this? Now, why I'm bringing this up is if you cannot think in the manner of your enemy, then you can't even anticipate what your enemy can do. And in this instance, because of the level of dissatisfaction and the possibility of sabotage, if we have not done that as a country, then there is a huge failure in terms of our approach, not just to security, but to risk management. So identifying these likely risks, putting in place mitigation measures, and then building resilience within Nigerians even before they happen. And that leads me to the issue of the use of social media for propaganda, for fake, both misinformation and disinformation. Because it's my field, I know that a lot of that is happening at the moment. And this is principally, and I hate to say this, but one of the pitfalls in this current administration, the inability of especially the intelligence arm to have strategic communication components within their folds, the platforms that they operate, so that they're able to not just to understand, but to counter the consequences of these three elements that I've mentioned, the propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, I'm sure you'll probably be wondering, how is all of this tied to the coup scenario I'm talking about? Now, the mix, if you have a spectrum of risks, which is what I do, have that spectrum, and then tick each item within that spectrum. Embedded in that spectrum is the possibility of saboteurs, either using the call for a coup or instigating it in certain instances. But where you already have that risk spectrum and you already have mitigants in place, all you do is to just push those mitigants and then they will take care of it. But what I see us doing at the moment, unfortunately, is knee-jerk reactions, mainly because we do not have this framework, this nationalistic approach that is institutionalized and that is able to even consider it before it happens. And I think it's, like I said at the beginning, it's the principal failure of intelligence. And of course, if we speak about intelligence, we know the various platforms in government that have responsibility for this.
Right. Dr. Adamu, let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue this conversation. We're watching Politics Tonight. We'll take a break now, and we will be right.
The Inspector General of Police has met with senior officers to review the state of security.
We are continuing our coverage of the arrest of Godwin Emefiele.
The Senate has summoned the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria to properly brief the Senate regarding the state of the economy.
President Bola Tinubu has announced the total removal of fuel subsidy.
The fresh subsidy is gone. What I will never take is threat.
Let's now bring you more development from Ibadan, the Oyo State capital, where an explosion has taken place. Tell us about this incident.
TVC News. First with breaking news.
Information is power, information is security, information is knowledge. On Labor Lens, we believe that working people around the world have real questions of their own. They want to know how the world of work operates, what it means to the employer of labor, how policies affect workers in the workplace. On Labor Lens, I ensure we engage effectively the organized labor, organized private sector, and government to get out of them information workers are in need of. I am Sharon Ijason, asking questions that make you get sense of the workplace.
Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. Tonight, to discuss the Niger military reaffirming its commitment to democratic rule. And I've been speaking with a security consultant and CEO Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Dr. Adamu, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, let's move on with this conversation. And I'm sure that I will not be taking you off the field when I ask by asking for your perspective on how we can improve our electoral process. I'm sure you're aware that conversations are ongoing about constitutional review and amending our Electoral Act. In what areas do you think, or would you want to see improvements or amendments to our Electoral Act?
Okay, even though, like you rightly indicated, this is slightly off my field, I do support the risk management component within the electoral process. So ahead of every elections, a risk assessment is conducted, and these risks are identified. And then, of course, the interagency consultative committee on election security usually sits down and then comes up with measures to mitigate those risks. But beyond that, I think one of the things that we need to admit is the attitude of our politicians. This has been a recurring issue. For as long as this attitude is not one that agrees to play fairly and play by the book, then we'll continue to have the challenge. I don't think there is any act that can address that. What happened in the last election, in the 2023 election, is a clear example of that. A lot of resources were committed. INEC, did its best in terms of the protocols and several other things that were introduced. Well, of course, we saw what IRF did, and then up till date, we've not been told what led to that, in spite of the fact that INEC has released its report of the election, but the clarity that would have allowed us to say, okay, this is what happened. And I think, like I spoke earlier on, the other issue is the role of the National Assembly in all of this. In spite of the fact that the turnover in the National Assembly continues to be very high, if I'm right, about 75% in the Senate, and then slightly lower than that in the House of Rep, in terms of the number of persons that were able to return. So they have been victims, as it were, but we've not seen enough energy from them saying, okay, let's do an independent investigation to see what really happened in the 2023 elections. Yes, they are going to be, they've promised a review, but then how will that review be based on facts if an independent assessment is not conducted? If you are basing your review just on whims and caprices, as it were, then I think sadly we won't achieve what we have. So if you ask me, to sit here and say this is what changes are required, beyond what has already been done, I do not think that that's the right approach. But perhaps picking elements of some of what we know went wrong, and I've given you the example of the use of electronic means to enhance the integrity of the process, including IRF, which ordinarily should have gone well, but it didn't go well. So we need to look closely at that. I've talked about the attitude of politicians, this desire to circumvent the process. And then lastly, I think would be the role of the judiciary. The processes are there. We, at the moment, and as a country, we are not even discussing it, what is happening in Plateau State, where clearly two levels of elections have produced, from the point of view of the judiciary, has produced different judgments that are, for all intents and purposes, contradictory. It cannot help the growth of our democracy. So these are areas that I think we need to look closely at and then come up with better ways to handle them and or to approach them.
Right, but now that we've tried all non-governance structures, parliamentary, diarchy under IBB, military and presidential, yes, it's still bumpy, but many would say we're not where we used to be. For the senators who say, of all of these options, the parliamentary system of government will serve us better. Where do you stand?
It's dicey. The parliamentary system is cheaper, and I'm all for a leaner government. I'm currently very unhappy with the big government. The leaner it is, the better for us. But however, I'm a realist, and I know that it will be almost impossible to achieve what the senators want to achieve at the moment. The presidential system is embedded. The beneficiaries of that system are the ones who will support this change, and we know that they're not going to support it just folding their hands, because unfortunately they will be the one that will affect. So on the one hand, I'm supportive of a leaner government and anything to do to achieve that, but I do not think that what is being envisaged by the senators in terms of returning to a parliamentary system of government is realistic, at least in the manner that they are approaching it. As a risk management specialist, what I have done is to ask myself what is happening, and it's very clear that these are pressure points that are being touched, and we're likely to see the emergence of a divided parliament, as it were, some supportive and then others not supportive. And so we're going to see an extended period of debate between the two sides. And perhaps maybe at the moment it would help provide the kind of checks and balances that we need in the parliament, which we're not seeing at the moment. But in terms of achieving this change, I don't think it would happen. If that is not the case, and I'm quite delighted with the statement by the Bola Tinubu administration that they are prepared to implement the Oron-Sanya report. I know there is a lot of argument around the timing and perhaps the fact that the report itself from 2012 to 2024, a long time has surpassed, and maybe there would have been a need to review it. But the elements of producing a leaner government, a leaner structure, and then of course the burden that at the moment is on the government are things that I'm supportive of. Anything that would achieve that, I think we should look towards it. So having said that, there are several components of this conversation that I think are being considered. One of them, for instance, is to prune down on certain elements of the government, including, for instance, the parliament. Some conversations have said, why don't we just have one chamber instead of the two that we have at the moment? Other discussants are also looking at the size of the executive arm itself, the number of ministers that are there at the moment, and then, of course, even the number of appointees, special advisors, and all of that. So all of these are conversations that I think as a country we need to have. But at the end of the day, what would be useful for us is to prune down on the size of the government. And of course, to enhance accountability. So number one, introduce elements of monitoring and evaluation. Number two, enhance the auditing function within the system itself, so that there will be all of the wastages and leakages that exist at the moment would be reduced. In the area of standards, which is number three, I think it would really help us if we have standards across all the governance measures. Earlier on, I spoke about the performance measurement system that this administration has embraced. I think it would also be very good to strengthen that performance system. If we do all of these 4 things, I think it would help reduce the current weight on the budget from governance.
All right, Doctor. For a minute, let's talk about the administration of justice in Nigeria, the issues and challenges. And this is because earlier you talked about the role of the judiciary in improving our electoral process. When it comes to administrative of justice in Nigeria, what exactly are the issues and challenges for you?
So, I mean, the 3 key components of that is the law enforcement component, the judiciary, and then, of course, the custodial centers. Now, if you pick these 3, each of them is challenged. The law enforcement, as you very well know, unfortunately, is not doing that simple provision, which is law enforcement. The reason why we have the kind of challenges, security challenges we have at the moment is because law enforcement is not as active and strong as it should be. So if you pick one agency, institution of government in that component, law enforcement, the police, the challenges of the police are so multifaceted. I can spend the next 10 hours talking about them. But the good news is that there is a roadmap for police reform that was inherited by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration, that we're hoping to see further action in terms of the implementation of that roadmap. A lot of energy, effort was put into producing that roadmap. And this happened post the NSAS protest, when several government departments and then our development partners came together, and then a committee was set up, and then that roadmap has been produced, which is supposed to look at several elements of policing. Now, this is the challenge. A lot of offenses are being committed. Those that are committing the offenses are not being arrested, and even where they're being arrested, they are not being prosecuted. And so the deterrence element within our law enforcement practice is almost completely eroded. I can, like I said, talk about this on several fronts. One of the first things that President Buhari told us he was going to do when he was inaugurated was to make sure that each of our law enforcement agencies have an evidence room. Unfortunately, 8 or 9 years after that promise, most of our security agencies do not, or law enforcement agencies don't have evidence room. So how do you hope to prosecute offenders when there are no evidence room? Every time on TV, including in your station, once an offense is committed, the scene where the offense is committed that is supposed to be barricaded so that evidence are protected, you see how that scenes are being violated on a daily basis till date. Even last week, I saw in one instance where a bomb was targeted a power infrastructure between Abuja and Kaduna, and the evidence was destroyed because people were allowed to touch it. So these are the kind of things that prevent our law enforcement agents from their ability. Now, that's just for law enforcement. If we move to the next one, which is the judiciary, some of the challenges that I've mentioned, of course, affect the judiciary. If evidence are not gathered and presented in a manner that would convince the judge of the guilt of the person that is being tried, then no matter how much the judge hates that person, he's not likely to convict him. The second component is the possibility of corruption within the judicial system. Of course, that has been well documented. And several other challenges. Some of our courts still use longhand to write their judicial reports and all of that, which is a huge challenge. So that is also affecting it. And then, of course, the third one is the custodial centers. And of course, as you very well know, there are several challenges within the custodial centers. They are overcrowded, and I must commend the current Minister of Interior for some of the efforts he has made in terms of decongesting them. And then, of course, the capacity and capability of those correctional centers to actually carry out the purpose for which the mandate for which they were set up. So if you put all of this together, it's very easy for you to see why judicial system or the criminal justice system is not able to arrest and punish offenders.
Right.
I think as a country, we need to admit that. We need to look at perhaps the ways to look, as a whole on how we can improve the service of justice or the delivery of justice across these three components that I've discussed.
Right. But how important or crucial is a competent, independent, and impartial judiciary in preserving and upholding the rule of law in this country?
I don't think there's any arm of government that is as important as that in terms of the rule of law. They are the custodians, as it were, of the justice system. And if they are independent and impartial, then their ability to uphold and to ensure the rule of law, I think, would be crucial for us as a country. At the moment, sadly, there is enough evidence to show that that ability is impaired. And this, of course, is as a result of so many challenges, some of them institutional, and then others personal to the persons who are occupying that position as itself. So I think the issues around the independence of the judiciary, issues around, earlier on I talked about the equipment support they need, and then of course the infrastructure that is required to allow for speedy delivery of justice, I think would go a long way towards enhancing the rule of law within the country.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. Now, before we leave tonight, let's talk about ECOWAS and this latest development. 7 months after, ECOWAS has finally lifted sanctions on Niger and others. What do you make of this? Would you say ECOWAS regretted its actions? And do you think lifting these sanctions will bring those countries back to the sub-regional body?
I wouldn't use the word regretted its action. Yes, it has retraced its steps, and for good reason. You don't issue a threat when you are not prepared to carry out that threat. Unfortunately, in terms of strategy, that was a huge gaffe. We issued the threat, and then we were unable to carry out the threat. In simple terms, we became a dog that couldn't bite. And it was very obvious that the recipient of that threat was able to see through our both, and they understood that we could not bite, and they are victorious in terms of that. But there's nothing wrong with admitting at a point that you are wrong, and then of course retreating, and that's what we've done. But what worries me is what strategic issues, how we are handling the retreat. What are we putting in place? Earlier on, I spoke about the strategic communication component that is almost lacking within how the government is currently approaching a lot of things. It also affected that. As someone who is monitoring those developments, I can tell you that there are foreign countries that are supporting, in particular, some of the coup, the juntas, including in Niger, and they are also active in Nigeria, where on social media platforms, you see a lot of the circulation of information from bots, from others. And this circulation is so active to the point where it's also affecting Nigerians. And of course, it's also supporting what they are doing in those countries. Now, having said that, it's not too late. I think we should speedily, the communication unit in Ecowas I must say, need to be strengthened. And one of the easiest ways to do that is for Nigeria to step in, like it's been doing, to support that communication component from a strategic communication point of view. In today's world, you cannot win a war if you do not understand the ability to influence both your citizens, win their hearts and mind, and then also the citizens of your enemy. And we're not doing enough of that. So yes, we've retreated our steps, but if we need to win the outcome, then we need to start influencing the various components that would help us win the outcome. The second issue is the need to use non-diplomatic platforms to reestablish discussions, contacts, so that the ground will be prepared and made easy for the diplomatic or the formal components of our diplomacy to come in and then to achieve the desired results. I haven't seen enough of that at the moment, certainly.
Right, but are you bothered that the parlesters of sanctions might embolden other coup plotters in the West sub-region body?
So it all depends. If we leave it as it is at the moment, I cannot rule out that possibility. One of the, I would say, gaps or that mistakes that was committed is sadly the inability of Ecowas as a sub-region to reach out to other sub-regions and ensure support. As a good example is countries in North Africa. They were able to continue supporting a country like Niger. Even US, which is a strategic partner to us, we've seen the role US played. It took time before it called development in Niger coup, and even after it called that development, it left its ambassador there. Its troops are still in Niger. So as long as we allow those type of windows that would continue to give some leeway for the Nigerian junta to exercise its freedom and capacity, then the ability of those sanctions to achieve their desired results would remain.
So in 30 seconds, Dr. Adamu, in 30 seconds, what do you think can be done to deepen good governance in Africa? In 30 seconds.
Well, in simple terms, is to enhance the M&E component, the performance measurement component that I talked about. That ability to ensure that when you vote money or you devote money to a certain component, that money is used for its purpose. One simple way is to strengthen M&E, monitor and evaluation, strengthen auditing functions, and then, of course, at the end of the day, have a performance review system that is able to give you the desired results at the end of the day. If we do that, and I think some level of good governance will be enhanced.
Right. I must say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. He's a security consultant and CEO, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you so much for your perspective tonight. Thank you. Thank you for always.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you very much for watching. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But the conversation continues from here. Get in touch with us on Twitter at TVC News NG and at Olajumoke using the hashtag Politics Tonight. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. I'll see you tomorrow.
What if every woman felt included, empowered, and celebrated?
At Wema Bank, we're not just asking the question, we're taking action. Through our women-led initiative, Sarah, we're breaking down barriers and opening doors for women everywhere. We believe in empowering women through finance because we understand that financial independence is a crucial step towards inclusion. By providing women with the tools and resources they need to achieve their financial ambitious goals. We're not just empowering individuals, we're building a more inclusive society. Join us in celebrating International Women's Day on March 8th, 2024, as we inspire inclusion and empower women to reach new heights. Wema Bank, empowering women through finance. Together, we can inspire inclusion.
Wema Bank, with you all the way.
The new Happic sachets. It has a thick formula, so all you need is just one sachet for your toilet bowl. It gives 10 times better cleaning and big savings too.
Wow, Helen!
Sparkling clean toilet with Happic sachet.
Muhammad Ali was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky on January 17, 1942. His birth name was Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. He began training as an amateur boxer at age 12, and at 18 he won a gold medal in the light heavyweight division at the 1960 Summer Olympics and turned professional later that year. In his early years as a professional, Clay was more highly regarded for his charm and personality than for his ring skills. He sought to raise public interest in his fights by reading childlike poetry and spouting self-descriptive phrases like float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. On February 25, 1964, at age 22, he pulled off a major upset, defeating Sonny Liston to win the World Heavyweight Championship. That same year, he shocked the boxing establishment again by denouncing his birth name as a slave name and formally took the name Muhammad Ali, which was given to him by his spiritual mentor Elijah Muhammad, leader of the Nation of Islam. For the next 3 years, Ali dominated the boxing arena. Muhammad Ali retired from boxing in 1981 and focused on his religion, philanthropy, and activism. In 1984, he made public his diagnosis of Parkinson's syndrome, which some reports attributed to boxing-related injuries, though he and his specialist physicians disputed this. He remained an active public figure globally, but in his later years made fewer public appearances as his condition worsened and he was cared for by his family. Ali was chosen to light the Olympic flame at the start of the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta, Georgia. He died on June 3, 2016.
At TVC News, wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news.
One of the world's most fascinating but endangered creatures is the pangolin. These unique animals, often referred to as scaly anteaters, are facing numerous threats. Pangolins are the only mammals in the world covered in hard scales, which protects them from predators in the wild. Unfortunately, this remarkable adaptation has made them highly desirable in the illegal wildlife trade. In this episode of Green Angle, we will be exploring the threats facing these incredible animals, the importance of their role in the ecosystem, and the ways we can work to protect them from further harm. Welcome. I am Esther Makwariola. Lagos is a low-lying coastal city endowed with a number of lagoons and wetlands. The wetlands, which are predominantly swamps and mangroves, act as flood control, a water purifier, nature's carbon sink, and serve as a home to endangered plants and wildlife. But growing land demands for developmental purposes is threatening this vibrant ecosystem. Esther Nosaroge, a conservation biologist, noticed a situation where some vegetation on the wetland area in Igomu, which also houses the National Arts Theatre, has been destroyed, and that some pipes are now laid across the area to fill it for some construction to take place. She is worried that this will not only threaten the lives and livelihoods of many who depend on wetlands for survival, but will gradually see rare species lose their natural habitat.
So my concern is we are losing a green space which is, has value for us. That's one. And the second concern is we need to, when we are talking about our culture and arts, we cannot remove the environment from that, right? So it's really not separate. So if we say we want to have a cultural and entertainment center, that's great, but human beings can live in harmony with nature.
In the meantime, state authorities were asked to adopt a sustainable approach to preserve nature rather than destroy it.
The Conservation and Ecology Department of the ministry gives permit for wetland usage, but we propose and we always promote wise use of the wetlands.
When we talk about the value of wetlands, you cannot take out human well-being from the value of wetland. In fact, at the core of the value of wetlands is the well-being of humans.
When we destroy our wetlands, it eventually affects us health-wise and in so many other ways. So it's important that we educate ourselves, be more aware of why this is there, why it was created in the first place, and then do better in conserving it.
In all of this, the value wetlands give to the environment is unquantifiable, which can't be ignored. And in preserving this vibrant ecosystem, it starts with learning to coexist with nature.
The good news is that there are efforts on the way to protect pangolins. Governments and conservation organizations are working to crack down on illegal trade, preserve pangolin habitats, and raise awareness about the importance of these animals.
On the part of the hunters and the bushmeat sellers who are carrying out awareness and education campaign, I personally started a club for the children of the because our law enforcement, they are getting up to the game. The Nigerian Customs has done very, very beautifully well on this. Nigeria has done very beautifully well on this. Seizures has been made. The porous borders are being sealed. A lot of work remains to be done, but so far things are looking good.
All of us to ensure their survival. By supporting conservation efforts, spreading awareness and being responsible consumers, we can help protect these fascinating creatures for future generations.
Green Angle returns in just a moment. Stay with us.
Forests, the lifeblood of our planet. They are not only a source of awe-inspiring beauty, but also crucial for preserving Earth's biological diversity, enhancing ecosystem stability, and mitigating environmental degradation and climate change. However, these vital ecosystems are under threat.